Hi everyone, this is the Tag Collab podcast where story meets science and Latina identity meets leadership. I'm Terry Arvisu, and this is a space where we unpack scripts we inherited, the ambition we carry, and the healing we deserve. Every week, I bring you unfiltered truth, research-backed insights, and raw moments that mirror your own. From the science of being seen to the art of saying no without guilt, we're talking mindset, motherhood, networking, and next level growth through a culturally grounded lens. This isn't just a podcast, it's a movement. Let's get into it. So everybody, today I am publishing the podcast of one of my most successful articles. And because I never recorded the video and somebody, when you play it on Substack, well, it's not my voice. And so my mother called me and told me that I needed to do this. So here I am doing it. And I'll give you a little bit of context about this article that I wrote. It's called I Am the Evidence of Their Sacrifice. And that's both a blessing and a burden. So I remember at one point in my time in Chicago, I had never really thought about this before growing up in Miami, because nobody really ever assumed in Miami that I was the first to go to college in my family. Yet, when I left Miami and I went to Chicago, I realized that most people assumed that I was the first to go to college in my family. And so for the first time, I did some inventory and I went back and I looked and I realized, oh my gosh, I'm the sixth in my family, sixth generation to go to college. I am the third female with a master's degree. In fact, in that inventory, I realized that I would not even be the first female Latina CEO in my family. My mother's aunt was the CEO of a local hospital here in Florida in the 80s. And so anyhow, I began talking to somebody in Chicago where this came up as a topic of conversation. And she said to me, wow, that's a lot of pressure. And I had never seen this as something that was pressure. It was just assumed it was something that I would do. And I recognize also that it was something that, if I'm quite, humble and frank about it, I kind of went with the flow. I think it would have been probably more controversial in my family to come and say I wasn't going to college than it would have been to come home and say, which I did, right? It was just assumed that I was going to go to college. And so my time in Chicago really allowed me to recognize, first of all, how much I respect people who are the first, because they've broken the mold. They probably didn't have a support system like the one that I had that just assumed. And so I didn't have to expend any energy on trying to convince anybody about this. I later had to convince them about other things that I talk about on this podcast. My move to Chicago was not as welcomed as I wanted it to be when I decided to leave at 35 with my kids. But anyways, it was that conversation with that young woman that said to me, wow, that's a lot of pressure, that I realized both the burden and the blessing that is. And I do believe, and you'll hear me say this very often, in the duality of things. Every coin has two sides. Every experience we have as immigrants brings both a little bit of a blessing and a little bit of a curse. And it's incumbent upon us as we grow older to unpack that and figure out which of it are we taking into the next chapter, which of it is working towards it for us and building us up, and which of it might be, holding us back through fear and survival instead of thriving, being able to thrive. So the article titled, again, I Am the Evidence of Their Sacrifice, and that's both a blessing and a burden. I will begin to read to you parts of that now, and it says, I am the evidence of a dream spoken in Spanish, of a freedom sought, not fortune, of grandparents who lost everything but their dignity and chose exile over submission. They didn't flee poverty. They fled repression. They left homes, titles, properties. They left behind the familiar, knowing the state could claim their children, strip their rights, and erase their voice. They arrived in this country with nothing but a name and the belief that they would be free. And now, here I am. A living testament to what they gave up, a beneficiary of their loss, the product of both privilege and pressure. What psychology says about inherited sacrifice. Psychologists call it intergenerational transmission of trauma and values. You don't just inherit genes, you inherit unfinished stories, emotional blueprints, and expectations that shape how you work, relate, strive, and self-assess. In landmark studies at Emory University, psychologists Marshall Duke and Robin Fivush found that their adolescents who knew their family history, especially stories of adversity and resilience, had higher self-esteem, lower anxiety, and better coping skills. But the very knowledge that makes us resilient can also quietly encode pressure to make it worth it, to carry forward the sacrifice, to excel so they didn't suffer in vain. That's not just emotional, it's structural. It's embedded into how we build identity. Anthropology and the moral weight of memory. In exile communities, identity isn't self-authored, it's inherited. Anthropologist Ruth Behar calls this the burden of inheritance, the unspoken obligation to redeem what was lost. In her writing about Cuban exiles, Behar shows how cultural memory becomes duty. Stories of loss and flight aren't just preserved, they're passed down like heirlooms. You're raised to know what was taken and what must never be wasted. Your life becomes a quiet promise. I will live fully because you could not. I will make this mean something. That's love, but it's also weight. What neuroscience says about why it feels so personal. According to neurologist Lisa Feldman Barrett, our brains don't react to the world, they predict it. From the time we're small, we're building models of reality based on emotional cues, cultural norms, and relational patterns. If your childhood was shaped by narratives of fragility, fear, and striving, your nervous system learns vigilance as safety. Achievement is currency, and risk can be very, very dangerous. It's incredible because it's ironic, because the biggest great risk takers were our grandparents, were our parents, were those who left it behind. But once they come here, we can become almost afraid of risk again. This isn't perfectionism, it's about protection. It's not about ambition, it's inherited alertness. Your brain is wired for survival, whether you needed it or not. I obviously didn't live the life that my parents lived, or came to this country like my grandparents, not knowing the language, the geography, the systems, and not being welcomed at the time. Your brain being wired for survival is inherited, and you carry it even when the threat is long gone, and you pass it down to your children. There are parts of that help keep us safe. They help us keep us alive. But as I've said before, this is the moment where we have to think about whether these things are holding us back or are they propelling us forward? Are they keeping us safe or surviving, or are they helping us thrive? What data shows about pressure to prove. In 2022, the Pew Research Center reported that 77% of U.S. Latinos believe they must work harder than others to succeed. The sense of responsibility is especially strong among second and third generation Latinos, many of whom carry inherited sacrifice as a motivational weight. A study in the Journal of Latino Psychology found that bicultural Latinas often report higher levels of a culture of stress, the internal conflict of navigating two cultures, two systems, and two sets of expectations. It's why I write this, that I write today. It's why I started my Substack. The researchers found that this pressure often comes not just from the outside world, but from within. We are hard on ourselves because we carry too much that was never ours to begin with. We're grateful for it, but gratitude is not a transaction. I've known since I was little that my freedom came at a cost I didn't pay. The awareness is sacred, but it is also can be a trap. For years, I confused reverence with responsibility. I thought honoring them meant self-sacrifice. I had to live an extraordinary life just to break even. But love isn't transactional. They'll tell you that themselves. And legacy is not a ledger. My grandparents did not flee their homeland so that I could live inside a guilt loop. They fled so I could live in freedom and so that I could thrive. And that freedom includes this truth. I am the evidence of their sacrifice, but I am not its extension. I am the next chapter, not the repayment plan. So if this landed on you, if this is something that spoke to you, I hope that all of what I publish speaks to you, that you please share it. Remember to subscribe to my Substack. You can also find my podcast on Apple and Spotify. And of course, I'm always open to feedback. It's not always the best to hear, but it is a blessing, not a curse, to hear your feedback. Thank you. The good, the bad, the ugly, I take it. This is Terry, and that's a wrap for today with the Tech Collab.